All right, so welcome everyone. I guess you're all a little bit tired today. So your task for now is just to relax and listen to all the amazing talks that we have prepared for you this afternoon. So we have talks from 10 from our sponsors. So we will start, quick announcement. So this will last about 3 hours. So dinner will be served right after this session. And then there will be the award ceremony starting at 6. So there is a small change in the schedule. All right. So let's start with Jonathan King from Atom Computing. Please, the stage is yours.
Cool, thank you. All right. So I'll be talking to you a little bit today about using neutral atoms for qubits and tell you a little bit specifically about our company, Atom Computing. So this is most of us. There's about 60 of us now in the company, so I think this is not quite all of us. Here we are standing in front of our Boulder, Colorado facility. You can really only see the doorway, but we have the whole first floor of that building. I actually live in California. Our original site, which we're still operating, is out there in Berkeley, in California. So the majority of our people are at one of those two sites. But our mission is to deliver scalable quantum computers. So maybe I'll kind of skip through some of these because I have like 20 slides, which I don't have time to present all of. But you've heard many, many times about all the things that quantum computing is going to do. That's great. That's why you're here. And of course, we have to make the systems, make them work, scale them up, and then actually get to the point of having useful applications running on them. But I think you've already accepted that as being true. So I'm going to tell you a little bit specifically about our company and neutral atoms. So this is a chart somebody made maybe a year or two ago now, kind of the landscape of quantum computing providers. And under the QPUs section, that means the people who actually make physical quantum computers. There's kind of the big category: superconducting qubits, trapped ions, neutral atoms, and a few others. And so there we are, along with a couple others in the neutral atoms category. And so when I keep saying neutral atoms, if it's not clear to you already, that's to differentiate from, let's say, charged atoms, which are ions, because those are atoms as well. But the technology and the way that neutral atoms actually work is quite a bit different. So yeah, here's just kind of a nice slide saying that some of the fundamental enabling technologies that go into this sort of work actually has a couple Nobel Prizes associated with it. One with optical tweezers, the other to do with laser cooling. How do you actually get ultra cold atoms that are cooled by lasers? And kind of pointing back to some of the seminal work, I guess as far back as 1999 in sort of academic groups, there was this understanding that cold atoms could be used as qubits, although this quote from that paper was around that time. These sort of enabling technologies just didn't really exist yet 20-something years ago. But first of all, what is the qubit? And so in general, a neutral atom can be a qubit. This is the qubit for us, in particular at Atom Computing. See if I have a laser. Maybe not. For us, we actually focus on alkaline earth atoms, which means there's 2 valence electrons. That's why those 2 outer atoms are highlighted in blue. That's a bit different than what some other people do that focus on the alkali. But when you have 2 electrons in the outer shell, they can kind of pair up. I think most of you are science and engineering students, so the idea of the electron spins pairing up is probably not a new idea. So in the ground state of such an atom, there's actually no degrees of freedom other than the nucleus. There's an 87 SR there, that means strontium-87, which is the element, and it has a nuclear spin. And the degrees of freedom of the nuclear spin actually are the qubit state. For those of you who might have taken some chemistry classes or ever gotten an MRI, this is the same system that's being manipulated when you get an MRI image or do nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. Using these states that are decoupled from the electrons make it very, very nicely decoupled from the rest of the world. So we get extremely long coherence times. The information lasts a really long time, kind of right out of the box. So I'll quickly just kind of run through what the steps are in making a gate-based neutral atom quantum computer work, and that'll actually probably take up most of my time, so we'll just try to get through that. So we got to prepare the atoms to actually assemble a quantum computer. This is not fabricated on a chip or anything. We actually have to assemble the atoms into the quantum register in a vacuum chamber. We have to do stuff to it, like this circuit actually has to mean pulses of light that are directed towards the atoms. And then you got to get the results out, actually see what the results of your quantum computing are. So yeah, one of those Nobel Prizes earlier had to do with atom cooling and trapping. This whole schematic is inside an ultra-high vacuum chamber, which basically means the atoms that we use basically have a mean free path that's much, much longer than the vacuum chamber. So they never actually hit any other stray molecules or atoms of gas. So kind of on the left end, imagine just a chunk of metal. You get it hot, it has some vapor pressure, atoms shoot off in different directions pretty fast because it's hot. If you can't read it, it says 100 meters per second there. There's some laser cooling system that slows it down in one dimension, then the 2D magneto-optical trap kind of confines it in the other dimension until you get into the 3-dimensional magneto-optical trap. And that's a fancy way of using lasers coming in from all the different sides, as well as magnetic fields to get just a cloud of cold atoms. And that's labeled, if you can't read it, about 4 microkelvin. So ultra cold atoms are kind of the starting point. And once your atoms are really, really cold, then they become easier to trap. And so this sort of double cone-shaped thing here is, imagine taking a laser beam, which is, not that small, but then putting it through a microscope objective so it gets focused down to a really tight point. That's kind of the beam profile. And then at its point where the waist is the smallest, that's where the light is the most intense. And if you've chosen the correct wavelength of light, then that's actually attractive. So the atom is the lowest energy when it's in the place of highest intensity of light. And if the atom's cold enough, it can be trapped there. So if we have an array of optical tweezers, which we can make through a number of techniques, then we can trap an array of atoms. And this is meant to be sort of a side image showing in the plane of that blue square, which is kind of tilted with some perspective there, you can see a bunch of trapping sites. So due to some physics I don't have the time to get into here, typically what happens is about half the sites get filled with a single atom, and then we have to do some fancy stuff. There is an animated version of this that I don't get to show you right now, but we can actually kind of do an etch-a-sketch sort of thing with like XY control, like take a picture of the atoms, see where they are. Some of the sites are not occupied. Then we rearrange the atoms until we get a fully filled array. The center picture on the bottom shows all the atoms have been sort of compressed in there to get a 5x5, or I think that's maybe 6x6 array that's fully filled. The bottom right would be an animation, if we could display animations here. So we can assemble arrays of atoms, single atoms. We have devices that actually can shoot individual laser beams at each of the atoms. There's an icon of a block sphere behind each of them indicating the ability to do single qubit gates by choosing the phase, amplitude, and sort of the waveforms of individual beams of light that we send to each of the atoms. This is what allows us to actually do circuits with the atoms, to manipulate and create quantum circuits. Yeah, I think I only have time to kind of show you 2 more technical things before I start getting towards wrapping up. To actually get the atoms to talk to each other, there's something called Rydberg states, or a Rydberg blockade interaction. These atoms are several microns apart. If you're familiar with atomic physics or chemistry, you probably know that the ground state of an atom is a lot smaller than that. So really, these are like infinitely far apart. Until you excite them to a really highly excited state, the electron cloud gets big, and then the one atom shifts the energy levels of its neighbors. And when you have a wavelength of light that excites an atom to a Rydberg state, and then you try to excite the atom next to it to the same state, it no longer works because the actual wavelength that would be needed to do that has been shifted by this interaction. And so this is really, I don't have time to get into the details, but the fundamental kind of secret magic, it's not secret, but like the magic that really allows you to make one qubit do something that is conditional upon the state of the other qubit. And this is the foundation for like conditional logic, which is our 2 qubit gates. So if you can control which atoms you excite, which ones you don't excite, you have the tools you need to do entangling gates. And the final piece, so I've said we can create arrays of atoms, we can do gates on them. The last part in the circuit that I showed you like on slide 2 or 3 is the measurement. Basically what we have to do is shine light at the atoms, and then they either fluoresce or they don't fluoresce. But to actually distinguish between the zeros and the states, we have to do a little bit of trickery where we take one of the qubit states and then actually push it away into a third state that I haven't talked about yet that is immune to the effects of the fluorescence, basically. This little plot that shows a red and a blue dip in the spectrum is basically showing how we can spectrally resolve those two transitions. So if you do that, followed by just a fluorescence image, then you get something that looks like the image on the right. And you could say, you could assign every atom that's glowing blue in this case, assign it a 1 state. All the ones that are dark are a 0 state. And you're essentially reading out your quantum information in terms of an image. So yeah, that was, I think I had 10 minutes to talk. I've used basically all of it. So you cool atoms, trap them in optical tweezers, use pulses of light to do gates, single qubit gates, 2 qubit gates. You do a little bit of fancy manipulation, take an image, and then you've done 1 shot of your quantum circuit, probably like most of you were doing at some point during your hackathon today. So I'll just get to the end with a few pictures. Inside there's a glass chamber that is holding the atoms in one of these magneto-optical traps. That's what the blue light actually is doing. The optical tweezers and all the quantum computing also happens in exactly that same cell. Kind of the laser systems look like this. Again, that nice blue light, which is the strongest transition in strontium, 461 nanometers. And here's just a nice little image from the lab where somebody's reading out the arrays of qubits in real time. And I'll skip over, oh yeah, we're also building our own custom control systems. So I'll just kind of skip through a few things and say thank you, because I think I'm at my 10 minutes right now.
Awesome, thank you so much. So we don't have time for Q&A, but if you want to ask questions, I guess you can still try to catch them later.